Okay, so now we have this diagram that looks more like what you had on the POGIL. However, it's more spread out. And if you have access to a printer, of course you can print this out and follow along. But we've got our hormones labeled. Gonadotropin releasing hormone causes the anterior pituitary to release the gonadotropins. We've got our pituitary hormones traveling to the ovaries. Those ovarian hormones that are produced, progesterone and estrogen, cause the lining or endometrium to build up. And then we've got graphs of the hormone levels and details of what's happening to the cells inside the ovary throughout the cycle. So the first thing I'd like you to notice is that this graph compares the levels of FSH and LH, whereas this graph compares the levels of estrogen and progesterone. And so as we look at these levels of FSH and LH, we understand FSH as the hormone that allows one follicle to grow and mature. Okay, so this is going to be, I'll switch to this. And remember, the follicle is the structure that contains the egg. So this is a follicle maturing. FSH is what does that, coming from the anterior pituitary. At ovulation, the egg comes out, and this happens once every 28 days on day 14, or the midpoint of the cycle. And it causes, in some women, a cramp, actually, because of this bursting. So you can see that in comparison to the graph, the egg releasing corresponds to this surge. And that surge is in luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone then causes the corpus luteum, leftover cells from the follicle, to take over in the next phase. So again, I'm going to move this page down. We can see that days 1 through 14 are the follicular phase events, days 14 through 28, the luteal phase. So focus on the follicle, ovulation, focus on the corpus luteum. Okay, so now we're going to look at the hormone levels, not just of FSH and LH. I'm going to label that LH surge triggers ovulation. Main event of the menstrual cycle. Now what we're going to do is look at the hormone levels. Sorry, you couldn't see that. Blood levels of estrogen and then progesterone levels. You see that the estrogen is rising during the follicular phase, and that's because as the follicle matures, it makes more and more estrogen. So here I'm going to write follicle releases estrogen. That's not what I wanted. There we go. Releases estrogen, and that estrogen helps build the uterine lining. So as we look down, we see that this is the uterine lining at the end of a period shedding, and this is the lining building under the influence of estrogen. The estrogen levels peak right around the time the LH surge triggers ovulation. Ovulation occurs on day 14, and after ovulation, we have the corpus luteum taking over. The corpus luteum then maintains the uterine lining. So we say that estrogen builds the uterine lining in the follicular phase. Progesterone and some estrogen made by the corpus luteum are going to maintain or finish and then maintain the density and the blood supply in that uterine lining. So corpus luteum then, after ovulation, produces progesterone and estrogen. And what that does is maintains the uterine lining. Okay, so very similar to the last picture, but I like this diagram because it layers. Again, this would be day 1, day 14. I have a cat that's walking by me. And day 28. All the events happening at the same time. Now, the key here is to think about the purpose of this, right? So the purpose of the hormone changes and the building of the lining and then the shedding of the lining, of course, is to get a female in a position to become pregnant. And most of the time, of course, she doesn't become pregnant. So I'm going to use a different color to kind of highlight those changes. If there's no sperm, here's the corpus luteum, it dies. Or I shouldn't say if there's no sperm, I should say if the egg isn't fertilized. Because the corpus luteum produces progesterone and estrogen, when the egg is not fertilized, no more estrogen is produced. You see those levels drop off right there. And then because no more progesterone and estrogen are produced by the corpus luteum, the lining sheds. And this is when menstruation starts. So we usually think of like the main event of the menstrual cycle is when a female has her period, when she's actively losing that lining. In reality, when we study the hormonal changes, we look at ovulation as the main event happening here in day 14, and the shedding of the lining is just the outcome of the death of the corpus luteum. Thank you so much for watching and listening. It's been my first ever video mini lecture today with you, and I'm always here for you. There'll be a short quiz over this on Tuesday. Just keep in touch through your Chromebooks. All right, miss you guys. Bye.